Good evening. This week we will be focusing on the mitzvot that are found in Parshat Behar, with special emphasis on the mitzvah of Shemitah and Yovel. These mitzvot in and of themselves find a great deal of detail within Parshat Behar. Rashi, of course, picks up on that, and he brings the famous words of Chazal, Levachi ma inyan Shemitah etzel Har Sinai, that these mitzvot, the Torah stresses, were given on Har Sinai. And Rashi mentions that just as these were given on Har Sinai, so all mitzvot were given on Har Sinai. We are now, though, in a time of the year that for many, many centuries was almost devoid of any new holidays, and there was not necessarily a special emphasis on Eretz Yisrael itself, but with B'chesed Hashem, with the establishment of the state of Israel, and with the extraordinary events which have occurred since its founding, of course, we find now that there is special reason to stress these mitzvot. Now more than 40% of the Jewish population is living in Eretz Yisrael, and that brings us to the question of Rov Am Yisrael, whether the majority of the Jewish people living in Eretz Yisrael will, shall we say, activate the mitzvah of Shemitah and the mitzvah of Yovel. That, of course, is something that have to be left to poskim and others who specialize in halacha far more than I. But I'd like to point out simply that Rabbi Leo Dessler in Michtav Me'Eliyahu, the third volume, writes the following about the establishment of the state of Israel. That this establishment, he says, is chasadim gedolim min hakatzeh el hakatzeh. That the events prior to and during the creation of the state of Israel are chasadim gedolim min hakatzeh el hakatzeh. He said that these constitute great chesed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from one end to the other, meaning to say, from the time of the Shoah, in which we reached the low point of Jewish existence in the last 2,000 years, as terrible as many other events have been, the Shoah itself was the low point of Jewish existence in Galut. And now he says the state of Israel represents min hakatzeh el hakatzeh. These are his words, the chesed. He says, what is that chesed and what are the chasadim? Hityashvut haYehudim b'mdinatenu be'eretz hakadosha. He says the establishment of the Jewish presence in the Jewish community in b'mdinatenu, in our state, not somebody else's state, and not a state, but our state, is the greatest swing from meyagon l'simcha that we as a people have had. Of course, it's not purpose. It's not perfect, but nevertheless, Eretz Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael, which we have, has brought great accomplishments for the Jewish people and for Torah itself. Over the last 2,000 years, there has never been a Torah Eretz Yisrael like we have now, in all forms of those who are Shomrei Mitzvot, everything from Charedim, Hasidim, to the Tzionut and Tzionim, and the Datiyim. All of them are focusing and learning and growing and rejoicing in Eretz Yisrael. So this parsha is an opportunity for us to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu again and again for this wonderful gift that he has given us. Now, this evening we're going to talk about several rationales for the mitzvah of Shemitah. The first we're going to start with is the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch tells us that Mishorshei mitzvah, among the rationales of this mitzvah, is likboa b'libeinu u'letzayer tziur chazak v'machshavteinu inyan hachidush haolam, to fortify and to affirm and reaffirm that the world is not something which always existed, as the Greeks had said, as some people now say, but it is the product of Hashem's creative mind and creative ability to bring the world into being yesh me'ayin. And so therefore, when we divest ourselves of ownership as individuals and as a nation, when we do that, then what we accomplish is we are doing it only for one reason, and that is to affirm the fact that God created the world. Chidush ha'olam. That is the Sefer HaChinuch. Because there's only one reason, well, I shouldn't say only one reason. Of course, the land itself derives a certain benefit from that, but to divest ourselves of ownership, that is something which is purely an affirmation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the creator and guide of this world. The Sefer HaChinuch gives a second rationale for the mitzvah of Shemitah, and that is, as he says, it is for us to acquire within us, again, as individuals and as a nation, the midah of vatranut. Vatranut is the ability to step back and not to claim everything we're entitled to. So you'll say, wow, what's the big advantage of that? A tremendous advantage. The willingness not to claim everything to which I have a right creates within us a mindset, again, as individuals and as a nation, of Avat Yisrael, the willingness to look at another person who has needs, and many times needs far beyond those needs that we are missing, and to make sure that that person is taken care of. And when a farmer says, the land that I've worked on the last 6 years, I've given my heart and soul to, and done all of the necessary elements to create the produce, the fruits, the vegetables, the grains, I'm stepping back. And I'm divesting myself of ownership of that for this year, so that I will be just like anybody else, just as everybody else can come and take for what they need, so I can do the same. And so therefore, that carries itself over, says the Sefer HaChinuch, into all elements of life, I remember that, we have a concept, not a Jewish concept, finders keepers. That, as a matter of fact, it certainly is not a Jewish concept at all. But I remember seeing one of my sons-in-law, when the children were very young, one of the boys, at that point, there were maybe 6 or 7 children in the house, and some child, one of the boys, had a tremendous find. He found a candy bar that appeared to be nobody's. So he walked over to his father and he said, Abba, can I have this candy bar? And to my surprise, my son-in-law said, yes, you can definitely have the candy bar. And he said, bring me a knife. So he brings him a knife and he cuts the candy bar into 6 pieces. And the child did not blink. Perhaps that child may well have thought that had he gotten the whole candy bar, he would have been shocked. He said, now go give 5 pieces to your brothers and your sisters, and take one for yourself. Vatranut. And he understood it. And this concept of vatranut finds its source among other places, but primarily here in the idea of Shemitah. And that in itself is what helps us to keep our people alive, because of it's a lot easier to inculcate within our children, and they grow into adults, the idea of Avat Yisrael, the Avtal Re'acha Kamocha, the idea of sharing, giving up things that theoretically are mine, and to some degree, I give to others. That doesn't mean that we have to have a communistic view of life. But the Torah does insist that 1 year out of those 7, 1 year, we are to recognize that other people, are missing, and other people need to get, because it's for the poor people, among other things. And then the third element, says the Sefer HaChinuch, is the idea of bitachon, that it should inculcate within us the idea of bitachon. What am I going to do for the seventh year? And the Torah itself anticipates that, and it tells us that then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will provide for 3 years, for the 6th year, the 7th year, and the year afterward. That's what it will produce. And so therefore, it helps to remove from us the concept of miserliness, that I'm going to save today because who knows what will be tomorrow, says the Sefer Chinuch. Who knows what will be tomorrow? While, of course, to some degree, we all have to exercise a degree of intelligence, and of course, we can't be foolhardy, but nevertheless, the idea of bitachon, HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides that idea, both again for individuals and for the nation. It's a part of the issue of Shemitah and Yovel. Now, the Rabbeinu Ibn Ezra mentions, he says very simply, Miketz Sheva Shanim, he says at the beginning of the 7th year, we are to observe Shemitah, Laman Yilmedu Kol Hashana Gam Kein B'Shabbat. He says the idea of Shemitah for the farmer is, and of course it was an agrarian society back then, the idea of Shemitah, the 7th year, divesting ourselves of ownership, means that now I have time on my hands. Time on my hands usually is considered to be an opportunity to waste. But says Rabbeinu Ibn Ezra, this is the idea behind Shemitah. Of course, he's not negating the other elements mentioned by the Sefer HaChinuch, but it is the idea that now the farmer has a chance not only to grow produce, but to grow intellectually and spiritually, because he now has time to learn Torah. So that is an important element in the concept of the Shemitah year. The Rambam says to us, the Rambam continues, he adds to what the Sefer HaChinuch said, although, of course, he preceded the Sefer HaChinuch, and the Sefer HaChinuch itself generally follows the Rambam's view regarding the Tamei HaMitzvot. But in addition to the idea of feeding people, the idea of helping the indigent, the poor, in addition, the Rambam adds, V'shetosifa aretz tvuata, that it'll give the land the nourishment that it needs to be able to produce even more. When the land is left fallow, it so to speak, becomes re-energized, and therefore will produce even more in future years. So, in fact, then, when we talk about these various different views, they are not contradictory. They are not mutually exclusive. All of them can come to mind. One of the things that's important for us to talk about is the very idea that that we can never reduce HaKadosh Baruch Hu's intelligence to what we can think of. There's nothing wrong with talking about the rationales for various different mitzvot, but we must remember that it is not, and no single rationale, unless the Torah tells us itself, no single rationale completely exhausts HaKadosh Baruch Hu's thinking when it comes to creation of a mitzvah. So whether it is so that we should be able to learn more Torah, as Rabbeinu Ibn Ezra says, whether it is so that the land shall replenish and become itself energized by allowing it to lie fallow, whether it is for the poor, whether it is to build character within us, the whole idea of being able to step back and say, I'm not going to claim every right that I might be able to. That creates a mindset of how we look at the world. Or whether it is the idea of bitachon, that it inculcates with us the ability to step back and say, no, I'm not going to take everything today because who knows what will be tomorrow, right? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die, is not a Jewish concept. The Jewish concept is that God provides, and Shemitah is, of course, a part of it. So it builds character, It builds trust. It affirms the fact that God created the world. It also gives us the opportunity, especially farmers, but not limited to farmers, of course not, to be able to immerse themselves in the Torah study, which is the very lifeblood of the Jewish people. And in addition to that, Rav Kook mentions something which should be good for us to recognize. Rav Kook mentions particularly that this builds the national character of the people. As you know, Rav Kook, of course, was concerned about the individuals, but he believed that particularly Shemitah is something which is designed to help us as a nation to become aware of our spiritual and of our ethical growth, and that Shemitah goes a long way in developing both of them. And while we mention Rav Kook, and of course, Eretz Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, I'd like to mention a disagreement between Rav Kook, although of course they didn't know each other, and Amos Oz, the famous Israeli author, a person very much revered in literature in Israel, passed away a couple of years ago, or several years ago, perhaps now. In defining the land of Israel, Amos Oz said that Eretz Yisrael and the state of Israel are in effect like a plank that is a plank of survival in a raging sea, meaning to say that there was no other place for the Jews to go. After the Shoah, there was the land of Israel and the creation of a state, because it became obviously evident to everyone that unless we had our Jewish state, we would be subject again and again and again to genocidal maniacs. It doesn't have to be limited to one country. So he said, it is like the only plank of a drowning person in a raging sea. Which means, said Amos Oz, that doesn't mean that we don't move over. We have to, and that if there are others, we move over for them. Now, Rav Kook, much earlier, of course, Rav Kook died in 1935. Rav Kook said that the land of Israel is not the possession of the Jewish people. It is organically tied to our existence. And the idea of being organically tied to our existence means just like I don't own my arm, I don't own a leg. It's not a possession. It is a part of my being. So Rav Kook, in probably around 1925 or so, made the statement that we have to realize that the land of Israel is not something that we can bargain for. The land of Israel is a part of the organic whole of the Jewish people, spiritually and through sanctity. So we have, of course, a significant difference between Rav Kook and the secular Zionists, such as Amos Oz. And that is, Amos Oz says, all right, it's a plank. That's what it is. It's something utilitarian that we need in order to survive. Kook said no. The land of Israel does not fulfill a utilitarian need. It is a part of us. And therefore we celebrate it. We celebrate its birth. Very shortly, we will celebrate the liberation of Jerusalem from the occupation of the Jordanians in 1967. It is a way that we have again been revitalized as a people. Part of our nationhood has been restored. So as we study Parshat Behar, and of course it's not just the mitzvot hatluyot ba'aretz here, although they are intrinsically tied in the land. We are to take care of the indigent, the poor among us. Achicha, it is our brothers that we are to take care of. And on a national level, the greatest way for us to take care of achicha, not just re'echa, as Rabbi Soloveitchik says. Achicha is a level far, far more important to us than re'echa. Re'echa is your neighbor, and you have to have respect for your neighbor and concern for your neighbor. And v'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, you have to have a certain love for your neighbor. That achicha means that you're willing to give of yourself and give up for yourself what that person needs, because he is achicha, your brother, your sister. There is no mechanism, no organism more suited to do that than the establishment of a state and a government whose only purpose is the welfare of each and every individual within it. And so we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the state of Israel, and we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the liberation of Yerushalayim from Jordanian occupation now 55 years ago. And with that, we will continue now during this remarkable period of the year, which once was devoid of any holidays and even the thinking of Eretz Yisrael, and now is filled with it and filled with a sense of purpose. Bezrat Hashem, we will see this purpose continue and grow as each year passes. Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom.